It's a cold, dark winter night in early January 2007. Jackie and Terry Hollenbach are asleep when Jackie suddenly awakens. She senses something isn't right.
Jackie smelled something hot or burning. She went downstairs to investigate, and she noticed that the front door and the patio doors were open.
She wakes their friend, Corey Van Kuren, who was asleep on the fold-out couch in the living room.
She tried to turn on the basement lights, but they didn't go on. So she sent Corey to get Terry up, and then Terry came down and joined them. They then proceeded down to the basement just to kind of check everybody was okay. The room in the basement was converted into a bedroom for their niece, Audrey, her boyfriend, Bobby, and their two young daughters. When they got downstairs, they realized that the light bulbs were smashed or broken because there was glass on the floor. The smell from the light bulbs might have permeated up to the first floor. When Terry entered the bedroom, he saw Audrey laying on the bed, face up, but she was covered by a blanket. She was unresponsive. He moved the blanket and saw the blood by her head. Initially, he thought maybe she was just beat or assaulted. And then upon closer inspection, he saw what appeared to possibly be a gunshot wound to her head. He yelled for Jackie to call 911. It was at that point that he realized that the two daughters were in the bedroom, and he picked up both daughters and proceeded back upstairs, waiting for law enforcement to arrive.
This was my first homicide, working in Laureldale. I did see the aunt, uncle, and Corey standing by the sidewalk. I remember the house being a single house. It was a covered front porch. When you got to the front door, walking in, there was a sofa bed that had been pulled out. Of course, the bedrooms were upstairs, but the victim, she had a bedroom down in the basement.
The Hollenbachs confirm the identity of the woman as their niece, Audrey Giannotti. Investigators expand their search, combing the entire house for evidence.
There were live rounds in the toilet, about a handful. Live rounds, you tell your partner. Bells and whistles go off.
Investigators bring everyone in for questioning. They begin with Audrey's boyfriend, Bobby Haynes.
Bobby Haynes told the detectives that Audrey, Bobby, and her two children, they went to a party that night. They came home to the residence. Shortly after that, a phone call came in, and it was Bobby's friend, and the friend asked Bobby if he would go for a ride with him. That resulted in a brief argument between Audrey and Bobby because Audrey didn't want Bobby to leave. He left, and he got picked up by his two friends. They just drove around Berks County for hours. So he had an alibi that he was out and with those friends. However, that we knew that there was a slight disagreement with Audrey before he left the residence. During the initial interview with Corey Van Kuren, he doesn't have a whole lot of detail. It's very general. Never heard nothing, had really no information. But I remember the one response when he was asked if he killed Audrey Giannotti, and his response was hell no. A forensic autopsy was conducted at Reading Hospital and Medical Center on Audrey Giannotti, and during that forensic autopsy, the forensic pathologists identified separate injuries.
When they were doing the skull examination, the doctor noticed another injury, which was a blunt force strike on the skull. And he said the item that you should be looking for, either the barrel of a gun or a hammer, which really gave us some information that we didn't know.
The detectives wanted to go back to the residence to look for any other objects or instruments or weapons that could have possibly been utilized to cause the blunt force trauma to her head.
The hammers in this case, a claw hammer and a ball-peen hammer, were in the basement area of this house. I tested the ball-peen hammer for the smallest part of that ball, and I used a blood trace chemical, and it was positive for blood.
Meanwhile, at the Laureldale Police Department, The Hollenbach's house guest, Corey Van Kuren, is brought back in for a follow-up interview.
The detectives learned that Corey owns an Intratec 9mm handgun. There was a list of at least 6 manufacturers on that ballistics report from the state police, and one of them was Intratec. That could be the break in the case. Corey's firearm, it could be the smoking gun. The firearm was secured up at his mother's residence. That ruled out his gun as being the murder weapon.
With the suspect pool dwindling, Audrey Giannotti's case goes as cold as the icy winter storms that blanket Reading, Pennsylvania.
I was assigned to take a look at Audrey's case. I reviewed every single investigative report, including DNA, ballistics. I reviewed everything. Nobody was ruled out at that time when I was given the case because it's a fresh set of eyes looking over a case.
Detective Schenk starts anew, beginning with the night Audrey's body was discovered.
There were no signs of forced entry other than the doors that were discovered that were open when Jackie came down to the first floor. We have busted lights in the basement. I'm of the opinion and pretty certain that somebody did that to make it appear as though somebody broke into the home and that this is some sort of random act. And I concluded that it was a staged crime scene. The ballistics evidence that was recovered at that scene, which included the discharged shell casing, it was definitely a 9mm and at least 6 manufacturers, and one of them was Intratec. I already knew that Corey Van Kuren owned an Intratec 9mm handgun. Back in 2007, 2 Pennsylvania state troopers responded to Corey's mother's house to determine whether or not that Intratec 9mm is present at that location. The troopers that went there said the gun was there. And then one of our own detectives contacted Corey's mother, and she provided information on the gun. Nobody laid eyes on that firearm at Corey's mother's house. That needed to be a priority. I contacted Corey. We arranged to meet October 25th, 2010 at his residence. I asked Corey about his firearm, if he still owns it. He acknowledged he did. I recall asking him if it's at his mother's residence, and he says, no, it's upstairs. He came down the steps, gun was secured in the holster, and I remember him asking me when I left there, what happens next? And I said, well, I have to submit this for testing and, we'll see what happens. The day before Thanksgiving, I received a phone call from the ballistics examiner. I remember him saying, you did it again. You got the murder weapon. I filed the charges, and then I had a operational plan set up for Tuesday morning. We had a team up there early and in an area that was safe to pull him over. He was taken into custody. During our ride, unsolicited, Corey blurted out, I guess I'll be spending the rest of my life in jail. Corey admitted and told me that he went down to the basement to have sex with Audrey. Audrey, flat out, pretty much told him, absolutely not, and get lost. Corey admitted striking her in the head, and Corey wound up shooting her in the head. Corey admitted to busting light bulbs in the basement, covered up Audrey's body with a blanket, and then he went back upstairs. Corey admitted to dumping the bullets in the toilet, but that they wouldn't flush. So at some point, Corey left, secured the firearm out in the vehicle owned by the Hollenbachs. In review of all the photographs at the crime scene, there was one point where Corey was standing out on the sidewalk in close proximity to a van owned by the Hollenbachs. Almost like he's safeguarding the vehicle. He knows the murder weapon's in there. Corey Van Kuren is charged with first-degree murder. It's an automatic life sentence if he's convicted or enters a guilty plea. We had a 2-day bench trial, and Corey ultimately got convicted.
Corey Van Kuren is sentenced to life in prison for Audrey Giannotti's murder.